paint on the icon was wrong. Father Andrei Vasile knew this the first time he saw it hanging in Dumitru Luca's farmhouse in the village of Iscovescu, Făgăraș Mountains, November 1904. Not theologically wrong, though it was that too. Physically wrong. The surface had depth it should not have had. Layers built over layers, 2 centuries of something applied monthly and absorbed into the wood like water into soil. When Vasile scraped a sample and sent it to the university in Sibiu, the reply took 9 weeks. By the time it arrived January 14th, 1905, he had already burned every icon in the village. The chemist's report identified the binding agent in the pigment as human blood. The chemist asked where Vasile had obtained the sample. Vasile did not write back. He had 14 days left before the thing the icons had been feeding stepped onto the village road and asked him, in a dialect 200 years dead, where its houses had gone. Father Andrei Vasile was 36 years old when the bishop's office in Sibiu assigned him to the parish of Iscovescu. He had served 2 previous parishes, both lowland, both near rail lines, both populated by Romanians who attended liturgy in pressed shirts and considered icons a decorative inheritance rather than a living practice. He was trained at the theological seminary in Bucharest. He spoke Romanian, German, passable Hungarian. He had published a short monograph on liturgical reform in Transylvanian parishes that the bishop had apparently read and approved of. The assignment to Iscovescu was framed as an opportunity. A high-altitude parish, somewhat isolated, in need of pastoral modernization. Vasile accepted it as a professional step. He arrived on November 9, 1904, by cart from Sibiu, a journey of 2 days over roads that worsened with every mile of elevation gained. Iscovescu sat at roughly 1,100 meters in a valley fed by snowmelt and hemmed on 3 sides by ridges thick with spruce and beech. The village held 83 households, roughly 400 people sustained by sheep, subsistence farming, and seasonal timber work. The church was stone-walled, slate-roofed, 200 years old, with a graveyard that wrapped around its eastern face and a nave that could seat perhaps 120. The priest's quarters adjoined the church. 2 rooms, a stove, a writing desk, and a window that faced the mountains. The people were welcoming in the way that isolated communities welcome outsiders with hospitality that is also assessment. Vasile was fed, housed, introduced to the parish council, and observed. He observed back. He noted clean homes, well-maintained livestock, a functional school taught by a lay teacher, and a piety that struck him as unusually consistent. Church attendance was not merely regular. It was total. Every household, every Sunday, every saint's day. In his lowland parishes, he had considered 50% attendance a success. In Iscovescu, the pews filled without reminder. He assumed this was devotion. He would learn it was maintenance. His first house visit was to Dumitru Luca's farm, a stone and timber structure on the village's eastern edge. Dumitru was 61, a widower, a sheep farmer whose hands had the permanent curl of a man who had spent 40 years gripping shears. He welcomed Vasile with plum brandy and bread. He showed him the house, and there, on the main wall of the common room, hung the icon. Vasile had seen thousands of icons. He had studied iconography at the seminary. He knew the canonical forms Christ Pantocrator, the Theotokos, the Dormition, the ranks of saints in their prescribed postures and palladates. What hung on Dumitru Luca's wall fit none of them. The figure was gaunt, male, draped in black vestments that were not priestly, not monastic, something else, something that resembled cloth, but had a quality of growth to it, as if the fabric had once been alive. The face was pale to the point of luminescence against the dark wood. The eyes were green, not the gold or brown of canonical icon painting, but a sharp, mineral green that caught lamplight and seemed to hold it a half-second longer than pigment should. The hands were extended in a gesture that, in any other icon, would read as blessing. But the fingers were wrong. 2 knuckles too long. The nails extended past the fingertips into something that was not decorative. The mouth was closed, painted in a dark line that Vasily initially took for shadow. But the texture of the paint around the mouth was different from the rest of the face, thicker, more layered, slightly raised, as if something had been applied to that specific area hundreds of times. Vasily stared at it for what he later estimated was a full minute before speaking. "Who's this?" Dumitru glanced at the icon the way a man glances at a window, functional, habitual, without consideration. "Sfântul Sângelui, the blood saint." "I don't know him," Vasily said. "Which calendar is he from?" Dumitru did not answer immediately. He poured a second glass of brandy and set it on the table between them. "He keeps us," Dumitru said. "Keeps you from what?" Dumitru drank. He did not answer. Vasily conducted a full parish census over the following 3 weeks. He visited every household. He counted every soul. He recorded ages, occupations, baptismal status, marriages, deaths. He was, by training and temperament, a man who believed that accurate records were the foundation of competent ministry. Every household had the icon. 109 copies. No 2 painted by the same hand. The oldest were cracked, smoke-darkened, their wood warped by generations of proximity to cooking fires. The newest were crisp, painted within the last decade on fresh-cut birch panels. But every icon depicted the same figure. The same black vestments, the same green eyes, the same elongated fingers, the same mouth. The variation was in craft, not content. Some were rough folk art in the plainest sense, produced by hands that knew livestock better than brushes. Some were accomplished with a technical skill that would not have embarrassed a tradesman in Sibiu. But the subject was identical, as if every painter in Iscovescu across 2 centuries had been working from the same model. Vasily asked who painted them. Several families pointed him to Anna Bârșia, a woman of 43 who lived near the church and who had inherited the practice from her mother, Magdalena, who had inherited it from hers. The Bârșia women had been painting icons of Sfântul Sângelui for at least 5 generations. Anna showed Vasily her workshop, a small room off her kitchen, smelling of linseed oil and pine resin, where 3 icons in various stages of completion sat on a wooden rack. She painted from memory. No model, no reference image, no master copy. When Vasily asked how she knew what to paint, she said, "Everyone knows what he looks like." He asked, "Has anyone ever seen him?" Anna looked at him with an expression he could not immediately classify. Not fear, not evasion. Something closer to the look a parent gives a child who is asked where the sun goes at night, a recognition that the question reveals a fundamental gap in understanding. "The icons are how we see him," she said. "That is enough." Vasily pressed. He wanted liturgical history, provenance, a paper trail. Anna could not provide one. Neither could any elder. The icon, the saint, the ritual. These were older than any living memory. They existed the way the mountains existed, as conditions, not decisions. The ritual. Vasily first observed it on December 1st, 1904, in the home of Gheorghe Morar, a farmer and woodcutter who lived with his brother Vasily and Vasily's wife and 3 children on the western edge of the village. The family gathered before the icon at dusk. Gheorghe's sister-in-law, Maria, pricked her index finger with a sewing needle. A single drop of blood welled on the pad of the finger. She pressed it to the icon's painted mouth. The blood sat on the surface. Vasily watched. He expected it to bead, roll, dry. Paint is not absorbent. Wood 2 centuries old and lacquered with generations of smoke residue is not absorbent. The blood should have sat on the surface like water on oilskin. It did not. Over approximately 15 seconds, Vasily counted. Because he was a man who counted things, the blood drop flattened, spread, and sank. It was absorbed into the painted surface the way ink is absorbed into blotting paper. Completely. Leaving no residue, No stain, no visible trace on the dark paint around the mouth. Maria withdrew her finger, crossed herself, and returned to preparing the evening meal. Vasile said nothing. He watched the icon. The mouth looked the same. The paint around it looked the same. But something in the room had shifted, a barely perceptible change in weight, as if the air around the icon had settled by 1 degree. He told himself it was porous wood, old paint, cracked, with capillary channels invisible to the eye. He wrote this explanation in his journal that night. His handwriting on that entry was not steady. Over the next 2 weeks, he observed the ritual in 4 more households. The process was identical in each. One family member, always an adult, usually the woman of the house, pricked a finger and pressed blood to the icon's mouth on the 1st of each month. The blood absorbed. The family treated it with the same casual regularity as winding a clock. In 2 of the homes, children were present. In one, the Sala household, a boy of perhaps 7 performed the ritual himself, under his mother's guidance. He pricked his finger with practiced ease, pressed the blood to the mouth, crossed himself, and went back to his schoolwork. He had been doing this since he could hold a needle. His mother confirmed that children began feeding the saint at age 7. Before that, a parent fed it on their behalf. Feeding. The word they used? Hranarea Sfântului, the feeding of the saint. Vasile began examining the icons more closely. In Dumitru Luca's home, with Dumitru's permission, he held a candle 6 inches from the icon's surface and studied the paint around the mouth through a hand lens he carried for reading small print. What he saw unsettled him more than the absorption had. The paint was stratified, not in the way old paint layers, naturally cracking, peeling, separating. This was intentional layering, uniform, dense, built up in monthly deposits like sediment at the bottom of a still pond. Each layer was thin, perhaps a fraction of a millimeter, but there were hundreds of them, compressed into a crust around the painted mouth that was measurably thicker than the paint elsewhere on the icon. He pressed the lens harder against the surface. The outermost layer was slightly tacky, not wet, not dry, something in between, like skin that has just stopped bleeding. He scraped a sample, a small flake the size of a lentil, pried from the lower edge of the mouth with a penknife. He sealed it in a paper envelope, packed the envelope in cotton inside a tin box, and sent it by post to the chemistry department at the Franz Joseph University in Sibiu on November 28, 1904. The postal service between Iscovescu and Sibiu operated weekly. The letter would reach Sibiu in approximately 10 days. The analysis, given university timelines, would take several weeks. The reply would return by the same weekly post. He had set a process in motion. He did not wait for it to complete. On December 2nd, Vasile wrote to the bishop's office in Sibiu. He described the icon, the ritual, the saint's name, and the absence of any canonical reference. He requested formal guidance. The bishop's secretary, a Father Danila, replied on December 14th. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first confirmed that Sfântul Sangalui did not appear in any Orthodox calendar, any regional hagiography, or any Carpathian folk saint registry maintained by the Metropolitanate. The second noted that the name, the blood saint, was inconsistent with Orthodox naming conventions and suggestive of heterodox or pre-Christian devotional influence. The third paragraph was a directive. Recommend immediate removal of all such objects from homes and liturgical spaces, followed by pastoral instruction on canonical devotional practice. Vasile had his authority. He had also, by December 14th, accumulated 3 weeks of unease that he had not written down and could not have articulated to the bishop's office if asked. It was not theological unease. He was theologically certain. The icon was wrong. The ritual was wrong. The saint was invented. These were correctable errors, and correcting them was his job. The unease was physical. Since arriving in Iscovescu, he had not slept well. He attributed this to altitude, cold, unfamiliar surroundings. But the quality of his sleeplessness had changed since he began observing the feedings. He did not have nightmares, exactly. He had impressions, half-waking states in which the icon's green eyes were not painted but present in the room, watching him from a distance that could not be measured because it was not spatial. He did not record these impressions. He was a seminary-trained rationalist. He recorded facts. On December 20th, he requested gendarme support from the Sibiu district office. 2 armed men, Corporal Miklos Ferenc and Private Gheorghe Aldea, arrived on December 22nd. Vasile briefed them. Their assignment was simple: assist in the orderly collection and destruction of unauthorized religious objects from private homes, a pastoral action backed by ecclesiastical authority. The gendarmes understood. They had done similar work before, confiscating contraband distilleries and unregistered firearms. Icons were easier. On December 23, 1904, Father Andrei Vasile went house to house with 2 armed men and collected 109 icons. Most families surrendered them without physical resistance, though not without distress. Women wept. Men stood rigid in doorways, watching their icons carried out with the expression of people watching a wall removed from their house, in winter, not anger, but the specific horror of seeing protection stripped away with no replacement offered. Children did not understand. Several asked their mothers why the saint was leaving. The mothers did not answer. 7 households refused. The gendarmes entered those homes and removed the icons by force. No one was injured. No one fought. They simply would not hand over the object voluntarily, and when it was taken from the wall, they stood in the center of the room and stared at the nail hole as if it were an open wound. Parashiva Dragan, the village's eldest resident, past 80, the woman who served as midwife and herbalist, and who carried a kind of authority the church had never granted and could not revoke, did not weep. She did not resist. She watched the gendarme lift her icon from the wall, carry it to the door, and add it to the cart. Then she walked to the village square where the icons were being stacked for burning, and she spat at Vasile's feet. "You are putting him out of his houses," she said. Vasile did not respond. He was supervising the stacking. 109 icons layered with straw and kindling in the center of the square. "A man with no house is a man with no walls," Parashiva continued. Her voice carried across the square. 20, 30 villagers standing in the cold, watching. "A man with no walls has no door to close against his own hunger. Do you understand what you are doing, priest? I am removing heretical objects from a Christian parish," Vasile said. Parashiva looked at him with something beyond contempt. It was the expression of a woman watching a surgeon amputate the wrong limb. "You are removing the lock from the cage," she said, "and you do not know there is an animal inside." Vasile lit the fire at 3 in the afternoon. The icons burned for 2 hours. The wood was old and dry and caught quickly, but the paint, the layered, centuries-thick paint around the mouths, did not burn cleanly. It smoked. Black smoke, heavier than wood smoke, carrying a smell that Vasile had never encountered, and that several villagers would later describe independently with the same word: iron. Not the smell of rust, not the smell of a blacksmith's forge. The smell of fresh blood on a cold surface, metallic and intimate, rising from the fire in a column that did not disperse in the wind, but climbed straight up, vertical, as if drawn. The fire burned until dark. When it was done, 109 icons were ash. Vasile returned to his quarters. He recorded the action in his parish journal with the date, the count, and the bishop's authorization reference. His entry was factual and concise. He did not record Parashiva's words. He did not record the smell. He did not record that when the fire was at its peak, every dog in the village began howling simultaneously, not barking, howling, and did not stop until the flames died. He slept that night, fully, for the first time since arriving in Iscovescu. He would not sleep fully again for 31 years. The first animal was found on January 2nd, 1905. A goat belonging to the Popescu family on a farm 300 meters above the village on the eastern ridge. The animal was dead, lying on its side in the snow of the pen with no visible wound except 2 puncture marks on the throat, each roughly 4 millimeters in diameter, spaced 11 centimeters apart. The goat's body was intact, no tearing, no predation damage, no sign of struggle. But the body was light. Bogdan Popescu, who had kept goats for 30 years, lifted the carcass with one hand. A healthy goat of that size should have weighed 25 kilograms. This one felt like straw. Vasile was informed the next morning. He walked to the Popescu farm. He examined the carcass. He noted the punctures, the absence of other wounds, the anomalous weight. He attributed it to a predator, a large bat possibly, or a species of weasel. The Făgăraș range supported both. He told Bogdan Popescu to reinforce his pen fencing and report any further losses. There were further losses. January 5th. 3 sheep in the Aldea flock, pastured on the western ridge. Same presentation. 2 punctures, no other damage, bodies drained. Weight consistent with near total blood loss. January 7th. 2 cattle on the Morar farm, in a barn with closed doors and a latched gate. Same punctures, same emptiness. The barn door was still latched from the outside. No window large enough for a dog, let alone whatever had drained 2 animals weighing 300 kilograms each. January 9th. 5 goats across 2 farms on the northern slope. January 11th. 3 more sheep and a draft horse. The horse, a Hucul mare named Rodica, 14 years old, 900 kilos, was found standing upright in her stall, dead balanced on locked legs, drained so completely that the veterinary officer from Sibiu who examined her on January 13th wrote in his report that the tissues showed a degree of desiccation inconsistent with the interval since death, suggesting either an unknown pathological process or exsanguination so rapid and thorough as to preclude normal post-mortem fluid redistribution. The veterinary officer, a Dr. Christoph Balog, was a methodical man. He examined 9 carcasses across 4 farms in a single day. His report listed the findings without speculation. 2 punctures per animal. No other wounds. No tracks in the snow around the farms that could be attributed to a known predator. No blood at any scene not on the ground, not in the snow, not on the animals' coats. Whatever had punctured the skin had also collected what came out completely, without spillage. Balog's official conclusion: cause of death, exsanguination. Agent, undetermined. Recommend quarantine of affected livestock areas and consultation with the Imperial Zoological Institute. His private note, appended to his personal copy and found among his papers after his death in 1938. I do not believe an animal did this. I do not know what did. 27 animals in 12 days. The village was frightened in the way that agricultural communities are frightened when livestock die without explanation, not panicked, but attentive. The collective focus narrowing to a single question: what is in the valley with us? Parashiva Dragan answered the question the same way every time anyone asked her. You know what is in the valley. You have always known. And now it has no houses and no food. What did you think would happen? No one brought her answer to Vasile. Then the shepherd. Mihai Cercel, 28, unmarried, employed by the village's cooperative flock. He pastured sheep on the Bâlea road, a track that ran northwest from Iscovescu along the river toward the high passes. On January 15th, he did not return at dusk. A search party, 4 men with lanterns, found him 2 kilometers up the Bâlea road, sitting against a boundary stone, alive, conscious, unable to stand. 2 puncture marks on his neck, 4 millimeters, 11 centimeters apart. His skin was the color of tallow. His pulse, when the men found him, was 140 beats per minute, the heart racing to circulate what little blood remained. Dr. Balog, summoned from Sibiu by emergency messenger, estimated Mihai's blood volume at approximately 40% of normal. He should have been dead. He was not dead. He was talking. He said one thing, repeatedly, to anyone who listened, in a voice that the search party leader, Ion Sala, described as not frightened but confused, like a man who has been given an instruction in a language he almost speaks. It asked me where its picture was. Mihai could not describe what it asked him. He said it came from the trees. He said it was tall. He said it spoke to him in words he almost understood Romanian, but not the Romanian he knew, older. He said it did not hurt him. He said it leaned down and put its mouth on his throat, and he could not move, not because he was held, but because his body agreed to be still, the way a body agrees to sleep. He said it took what it needed and stood back up and asked the question. He said it asked politely. It asked me where its picture was, Mihai repeated, when the men carried him back to the village. It wanted to know why it couldn't find its picture. Vasile heard this from Ion Sala on January 16th. He listened. He noted the puncture dimensions matched the livestock wounds. He noted the behavioral description, approach, immobilization, feeding, communication. He noted the question, where is its picture? He did not write it in his journal. He went to his quarters. He stood in front of the wall where he had hung his own cross, in place of the icon that had been there when he arrived. The icon that had hung in the priest's quarters for longer than any living person could remember. The icon he had burned with the other 108. The nail hole was still visible. The wood around it had a faint discoloration he had not previously examined. He looked at it now. The discoloration was not water damage. It was not smoke. It was a residue organic, layered, concentrated around the nail hole, like sap around a wound in bark. The icon had been in contact with this wall for so long that whatever the icon was made of had bled into the wood itself. He touched it. The residue was cool, slightly tacky, and it smelled faintly, unmistakably, of iron. 2 days later, the chemistry report arrived from Sibiu. The letter was dated January 4th and had traveled by the weekly post. The chemist, a Dr. Wilhelm Schuster, had analyzed the paint sample scraped from Dumitru Luca's icon. His findings were precise. The pigment base was lamp black and iron oxide, consistent with traditional icon paint from the 17th or 18th century. The binding agent, the medium that held the pigment to the wood, was not linseed oil, not egg tempera, not any recognized paint binder. The binding agent was human blood, layer upon layer of it. Each monthly application dried into the paint, bonded with the previous layer, and formed a substrate that was chemically distinct from any natural material Dr. Schuster had encountered. He noted that the blood was not degraded in the way exposed blood normally degrades. It was preserved, not by any technique he could identify, but by something in the icon itself, some property of the wood or the original paint that maintained the biological material in a state between living tissue and dried specimen. His final paragraph: I am unable to classify this sample within known art conservation categories. The organic binding agent is unquestionably human in origin. Applied in successive layers over what appears to be an extended period, possibly centuries, I request the provenance of this object and the circumstances under which such a material was applied. If this represents a cultural practice, it is unknown to this department and should be documented. If it represents something else, I would appreciate clarification. Vasile read the letter twice. He folded it. He placed it in the drawer of his writing desk beside his journal. The chemistry report had taken 9 weeks to arrive. The icons had been ash for 23 days. 27 animals were dead. A shepherd was recovering from a blood loss that should have killed him. And the thing the icons had been feeding the thing the entire village had been feeding. 1 drop per household per month. 109 drops for 200 years was in the valley. hungry, and asking where its pictures had gone. Vasily had the answer. The icons were in the ash heap in the village square under 3 inches of January snow. He did not have a response. January 27th, 1905. 12 days after the shepherd. Dusk. The sun set behind the western ridge at approximately 4:15 in the afternoon. Iscovescu's lamplighters, 2 boys of 14 who maintained the village's 6 kerosene street lamps, made their rounds at 4 o'clock. By 4:30, the village road was lit in patches, the pools of yellow light separated by stretches of dark mud and ice. The temperature was -11 Celsius. The sky was overcast, the cloud deck low enough to cap the valley and flatten sound. Snow had fallen that morning but stopped by noon. The air was still. Wood smoke hung in the streets at head height, trapped by the inversion layer, giving the village a gray opacity that shortened sight lines to 30 or 40 meters. Vasily was in the church. He had spent the afternoon preparing his Sunday homily, a task he performed mechanically now. His mind no longer on liturgical reform, but on the nail hole in his wall, and the chemistry report in his desk, and the question that Mihai Sircel kept repeating from his bed in the Sala household where he was recovering. Where is its picture? At 4:20, the dogs began. Not barking, not howling, the way they had during the icon burning. A sound Vasily had not heard dogs make before. A low, sustained whine that seemed to come from every household simultaneously, as if every animal in the village had detected the same stimulus at the same moment and responded with the same involuntary vocalization. Not alarm, submission. The sound dogs make when they flatten against the ground and press their bellies to the dirt, not because they are afraid of being struck, but because something in their neurology has overridden their behavior and ordered them to be small. Vasily went to the church window. The village road was visible in segments between the lamp pools. Wood smoke, mud, fence posts, the dark shapes of houses with lit windows. Normal. Except that no person was visible on the road. And in a village of 400, at the hour when evening chores were underway, the road should not have been empty. Then Vasily heard something else. Footsteps. A single set, moving along the road from the north, from the direction of the ridge, the farms, the Bâlea road, where the shepherd had been found. The footsteps were heavy but measured, not running, not stumbling, walking with a rhythm that Vasily's body recognized before his mind did the cadence of a procession. A single figure, walking at the pace of a priest approaching the altar. He could not see it yet. The smoke was too thick, the light too broken, but he could hear the steps, each one landing with a weight that was wrong for the frozen mud, too solid, too deep, as if the figure weighed 2 or 3 times what a person should. Then the smoke shifted, a draft from the northern end of the road, where the valley opened toward the ridge, pushed the hanging wood smoke south in a slow wave, and for approximately 15 seconds, the road was clear. The figure was on the road. It was what the icon had depicted, not symbolically, not approximately, with a precision that made Vasily's vision narrow and his hands gripped the window frame until the wood creaked. The black vestments, not cloth, he could see now, but something fibrous, something that moved independently of the body beneath it, stirring and settling in a way that had nothing to do with the still air. The white skin, luminous in the lamplight, the way the icon's painted face had been luminous in candlelight. The green eyes, visible even at 40 meters, even in smoke, even through the distortion of a church window with imperfect glass green like copper sulfate, green like deep ice, green like something that generated its own light rather than reflecting available light. The hands were at its sides, and the fingers extended past where fingers should stop, each one as long as a man's forearm, tapering to points that were not nails but structures, bone-colored, curved slightly inward, dense enough to catch lamplight along their edges. The hands did not swing with the figure's gait. They hung, motionless, heavy, like tools not yet in use. The figure was 8 feet tall, perhaps 9. Its head, above the vestment's high collar, was framed by dark hair that did not move like hair too heavy, too dense, falling past the shoulders in ropes that Vasile would later realize were matted with something he could not identify from the window. It walked to the center of the village. It stopped where the road widened into the square, the same square where, 35 days earlier, 109 icons had burned. It stood in the ash-stained snow. It looked at the houses. It looked at the dark rectangles of doors and the lit rectangles of windows. It turned slowly, taking in the full circumference of the square. Then it spoke. The voice carried through the closed church window, through the stone walls, through the wood smoke and the cold. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The voice operated at a frequency that bypassed the ear and registered somewhere deeper in the chest, in the jaw, in the base of the skull. Vasile felt the words before he heard them. Unde sunt casele mele? Where are my houses? The Romanian was archaic. 2 centuries dead, at least a dialect form Vasile recognized from seminary study of pre-modern liturgical texts, but had never heard spoken. The vowels were rounder, the consonants harder, the cadence slower. It was Romanian, the way Latin is Italian, the ancestor, not the descendant. The question hung in the air. The dogs had gone silent. Every dog in the village, silent at the same moment, as if the voice had reached into their skulls and turned them off. 3 men came out of the Morar house. Vasile watched from the church window. Vasile Morar, no relation to the priest. The name was common in the district, emerged first, holding a lantern. His brother Gheorghe followed with a hand axe he used for splitting kindling. Ion Sala came third, gripping a hayfork. 3 men in wool coats and fur hats, carrying the tools they had within reach, walking toward the figure in the square with the stiff, committed gait of people who have decided to act before they have decided what action to take. They stopped 12 feet from the creature. The lantern light reached the figure's face. Vasile Morar raised the lantern higher, instinctively, the way a man raises a lantern to identify something in the dark. The light climbed the creature's torso, the vestments, the collar, and found the face. The face was not rage. Vasile the priest, in the church, watching through glass, had expected rage, had expected the snarl of a predator, the blank hunger of an animal, the theatrical menace of the folk tales he had dismissed as a superstition. What the lantern found was none of these. The face was grief. A grief so structural it had reshaped the features around itself, the mouth drawn, the brow compressed, the green eyes carrying a density of experience that Vasile recognized, with a shock that went through him like voltage as age. Not the age of an old man, the age of a thing that had been alive long enough to watch the language it spoke become extinct, the age of a being that had built a system to manage itself, had maintained that system for 2 centuries, had watched generations of humans participate in the system without understanding it, and had now watched a single man, a well-intentioned, theologically correct, catastrophically ignorant man, burn the system to the ground in an afternoon. The creature spoke again, slower, as if simplifying for an audience that did not share its grammar. Faracase, nu potain foamea. Without houses, I cannot hold the hunger. A pause. The green eyes moved from Vasile Morar's face to Gheorghe's, to Ion Sala's, then up to the church window, where Father Andrei Vasile stood gripping the frame. The creature held the priest's gaze through the glass for 3 seconds, maybe 4, long enough for Vasile to understand that the creature knew exactly who had burned the icons, long enough for Vasile to understand that the creature had come to this square, to this spot, at this hour, not to hunt, but to make a request. Punati le'inapoi. Put them back. A final word, quieter than the others, spoken with an inflection that Vasile's seminary training in archaic liturgical Romanian allowed him to recognize barely through the glass. Vă rog, please. The creature turned. Not abruptly, slowly, the way a large body turns when the decision to turn has already cost something. It faced north, the outlying farms, the ridge, the direction it had come from. It walked, the same processional gait, the same depth of footprint, the same vestments stirring in air that was not moving. It walked north on the village road, past the last lamplight, into the dark between the village and the farms. Gheorghe Morar lowered his axe. Vasile Morar lowered his lantern. Ion Sala set the hayfork against the Morar fence and put his hands on his knees and bent forward and vomited into the snow. Father Vasile, in the church, released the window frame. His fingers had left impressions in the wood. He looked at them. He looked at the road. He looked at the nail hole in his wall. The creature had asked him to put the icons back. He had burned every icon. He had burned the paint that took 2 centuries to build. He had burned the blood of generations of families who had fed a thing they called a saint. Not because they believed it was holy, but because they understood in the way that people understand gravity, without needing to name the physics, that the feeding kept the hunger contained. He had nothing to put back. Gheorghe Morar was dead within 8 hours. What came next did not come from the creature on the road. This is the fact that the coroner's report missed, that doctor. Balog's veterinary assessment had no framework to receive, that the Sibiu district office filed under undetermined and never revisited. The figure that spoke to the 3 men in the square, the patriarch, Sfântul Sangălui, the thing the icons depicted, did not kill the 11. Its children did. I will not speculate on the biology. I will not pretend that the mechanism is understood. What the evidence supports is this. The icon system in Iscovescu was not a feeding arrangement for a single entity. It was a containment architecture for a family group. 1 patriarch, 3 offspring. The patriarch older, self-aware, capable of speech, capable of negotiation, capable of grief, had built the system 2 centuries earlier, because he understood what his children were, what they would do without restraint, what they had done before the compact, in an era the village's oral history preserved only as the time before the saint came. Each icon was a node in a distributed network. 109 nodes, each fed monthly, each binding a fraction of the family's hunger into a managed, sustainable draw. The blood offerings were not symbolic. They were caloric. Micro-doses of human blood, distributed across 109 points, kept 4 creatures 3 feral, 1 self-governing in a state of controlled satiation. Not full, not starving, maintained, the way a furnace is maintained. Enough fuel to keep the fire burning low, never enough to let it go out, never so little that the firebox cracks from cold. The burning of the icons collapsed the network in a single afternoon. 109 nodes went dark. The caloric input dropped to 0, and the 3 offspring creatures, with no memory of voluntary restraint, no capacity for speech, no understanding of compacts or negotiation, woke hungry for the first time in 200 years. The livestock drainings were the offspring. The attack on the shepherd was the offspring, though in that case, the patriarch intervened before the feeding became fatal, which is why Mihai Sărcel survived with 40% blood volume rather than 0. The patriarch had been managing the offspring's hunger since the icons burned, chasing them across the valley, pulling them off kills, redirecting their feeding toward animals when he could, and limiting it when he could not. For 27 days, the patriarch held the line. Alone, without the network, running on reserves of self-control that had not been tested in 2 centuries. On January 27th, he came to the village and asked for the icons back. He was not threatening. He was reporting, telling the village, telling the priest that his reserves were failing, that the offspring were accelerating, that the system needed to be reinstated, or what came next would not be something he could prevent. The men raised weapons. The priest watched through glass. No one understood the request. The creature turned and walked back to the farms, back to the offspring, back to the job of containment it had been performing since December 23rd. On the night of January 28th, the offspring entered the village. Parashiva Dragan heard them arrive. She was in her house, a stone-walled structure near the church, older than most buildings in Iscovescu, built by her husband's grandfather with fieldstone walls 2 feet thick and a door of oak reinforced with iron straps. Since the icon burning, she had been preparing, not because she knew exactly what would come, but because she knew what had been removed. And she understood the relationship between the removed thing and the thing it contained with a clarity that no one else in the village shared. She had stacked iron against the door. Horseshoes, pothooks, fire irons, a length of chain from the old smithy that she had pulled from a disused shed and coiled in front of the threshold. She did not know if iron would work. She knew only that the oldest stories older than the icon, older than the saint, older than the church, said iron held things. She was operating on information 3 generations deep, and it was the best information available. The offspring came down the main road at approximately 10 o'clock at night. Parashiva did not see them. She heard them. The sound was not footsteps. It was not the patriarch's measured processional gait. It was fast. Bursts of movement separated by pauses, the pattern of predators who stopped to assess and then closed distance in sprints. Then she heard the first door open. Not break, open. The latch of a wooden door lifted from outside. The hinges moving. The door swinging inward. And then silence from inside the house. A second door. Same sound. Latch. Hinges. Silence. A third. Parashiva pressed her back against the far wall of her house and watched the iron stacked against her door. Her lantern was out. She sat in the dark and listened to doors opening, one by one, in a sequence that moved down the village road from north to south. Methodical, unhurried, as if the things opening the doors had a list. No screams. This was the detail that Parashiva would repeat later to anyone who asked, and that no one could adequately explain. 11 people were fed upon and killed in their homes that night, and none of them screamed. The feeding was silent. Whatever the offspring did when they entered a home, whatever mechanism they used, the same immobilization the shepherd had described, the body agreeing to be still. It suppressed vocalization. The village heard doors open. The village heard doors close. The village heard nothing between. Then Parashiva heard something else. From outside, in the road, between the houses, moving in the opposite direction from the offspring, south to north, against their progress, as if trying to intercept them, the patriarch. She heard it because it was not silent. It was speaking, loudly, in the language that was not Romanian. The language Mihai Cercel had described as almost words. A language that predated the valley, predated the village, predated the compact. The patriarch was shouting at its children. The tone was unmistakable in any language. Command, desperation, fury, pleading. The children did not respond. She heard the patriarch's footsteps accelerate to the processional gait abandoned, replaced by a run that shook the frozen mud and rattled the shutters of the houses it passed. She heard a collision, a sound like 2 stone walls meeting. A shriek, not human, not animal, pitched at a frequency that made the iron chain at Parashiva's door vibrate against the oak like a struck bell. Then she heard the patriarch dragging something. A heavy body pulled through mud, away from a house whose door was open. The shrieking continued. The patriarch was pulling one offspring away from a feeding, while the other 2 continued, unopposed, down the road. 1 against 3. The arithmetic had been impossible from the start. The patriarch could not be in 3 places at once. Every minute spent restraining one offspring was a minute the other 2 fed unopposed. The 11 dead were the minimum. The casualties of a battle the patriarch fought with a ratio it could not win. in a village whose priest had burned the only infrastructure that made the ratio manageable. Parashiva's door was not opened. The iron held, or the offspring avoided iron, or the patriarch redirected them, or Parashiva's house was simply not on the list. She could not know. She sat in the dark behind iron and listened to a parent try to stop its children from doing the thing they were made to do, and fail, and keep trying, for 4 hours, until dawn. The first light of January 29th reached the valley at approximately 7:15 in the morning. Parashiva waited until full daylight, nearly 8 o'clock, before removing the iron from her door. The village road was empty. No figure, no offspring, no movement. The smoke from household chimneys rose straight up in the still air. The fires had been maintained. Whatever had entered the homes had not disturbed the fires. The village looked, from the outside, exactly as it looked every morning. Parashiva walked the road. The first closed door was the Popescu house. She knocked. No answer. She opened the door. Bogdan Popescu was in his bed, on his back, hands folded across his chest, eyes closed, the blanket drawn to his chin. He looked like a man who had been laid out for burial by someone who knew the customs, arms crossed, face composed, the body positioned with care. He was dead. 2 punctures on the neck. The body was the weight of dry wood. The room smelled of nothing, not death, not blood, not the iron smell of the icon fire. Nothing. A clean room with a dead man and a fire still burning in the stove. She went to the next house. The same. And the next. 11 homes. 11 dead. Each body laid out identically. Hands folded, eyes closed, blankets drawn, doors closed from the outside after the feeding was complete. Not a massacre, a procedure, conducted with a precision that was more disturbing than violence, because it implied familiarity with human customs, an understanding of how humans prepared their dead, and a decision to perform that preparation as a courtesy, or as something worse than courtesy, as a signature. The dead were Bogdan Popescu, his wife Elena, Gheorghe Morar, his niece Ioana, age 19, the Aldea family husband, wife, and teenage son, 2 elderly sisters named Kostea, who lived together on the South Road, a man named Marin Vukovic, a Serb who had married into the village 8 years earlier, and a widow, Rodica Sala, Ion Sala's mother, aged 70. Vasily emerged from the church at 8:30. He had spent the night behind the altar, on the stone floor, with the church doors barred. He had heard the doors opening and closing. He had heard the patriarch's voice in the road. He had heard the collision and the shrieking. He had not gone out. He had pressed his face to the stone floor and recited psalms until the sound stopped. He walked the road with Parashiva. He saw the bodies. He counted the dead. 11. He stood in the Morar house, where Gheorghe, the man, who had raised the axe 12 hours earlier, lay on his back with his hands folded and his body emptied, and his face carrying an expression that was not pain, not terror, but the absolute neutrality of a man who was unconscious before the first drop was drawn. Vasily noticed the pattern. He could not help noticing. Of his parish's 83 households, 11 had been entered. 72 had not. The 11 that were entered were not random. They were, and Vasily confirmed this by walking every door in the village, the 11 households that had surrendered their icons, most passively. The families that had handed over the icons without protest, without tears, without stacking iron or gripping door frames. The cooperative ones. The 7 households that had resisted the ones whose icons the gendarmes had removed by force were untouched. Parashiva's house, where the iron was stacked, was untouched. The Morar house, where Gheorghe had raised the axe, was entered. But only Gheorghe was dead. His brother, Vasily Morar, who had held the lantern and faced the creature in the road, was alive, asleep, unharmed, with no puncture marks and no memory of the night. Parashiva explained it before the priest could. The ones who fought had iron in their hands when they fought. The ones who wept had grief in their hearts when they wept. The ones who opened their doors and obeyed you had nothing. She was not accusing. She was describing. The offspring were not strategic. They were not intelligent. Not the way the patriarch was intelligent. They were efficient. They entered the homes that offered least resistance. The path of least resistance was the path of compliance. The households that had obeyed the priest's order, surrendered their icons, and trusted institutional authority to protect them in the absence of the protection they had maintained for 2 centuries. The priest's authority had opened the doors, not literally, but the families that trusted him had nothing else to trust once the icons were gone. They had surrendered their only protection at the instruction of a man who did not know it was protection. Vasile found the last thing at 9 o'clock that morning. On the church steps, leaning against the main door, where it had not been when he entered the church the previous evening, a plank of wood, roughly the size of an icon, 30 centimeters by 40. On it, painted in blood that was still wet, drying in the cold morning air, was a face. His face, rendered in the same style as the original icons, the proportions, the composition, the posture of the hands. But the face was Father Andrei Vasile's, unmistakable. The jawline, the thinning hair, the small scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood fall, painted with a fidelity that no village artist could have achieved in darkness, in blood, in the hours between feeding and dawn. The creature had painted it. The patriarch had come to the church steps while his children fed, and it could not stop them. And it had made this, not a mockery, not a threat, a blueprint. Start here. Start with yourself. You burn the houses. Build the first new one with your own face. Vasile held the plank. The blood paint was cold under his fingers. The eyes, his own eyes, rendered in the creature's style, looked back at him with an expression he recognized as the one he wore every morning in the small mirror above his washstand, the face of a man who has done something he cannot undo, and is beginning to understand the scope of what cannot undo means. He carried the icon inside the church. He hung it on the wall of his private chamber. He sat in front of it for the rest of the day. He did not eat. He did not pray. He did not file a report. He understood. The Sibiu district office recorded the deaths as acute exsanguination, cause undetermined, consistent with epidemic blood loss potentially attributable to environmental toxin or unknown parasitic agent. The file was opened on February 3, 1905, assigned case number FG-1905-0041, and classified as a public health matter under the jurisdiction of the Imperial Sanitary Commission. A follow-up inspection was recommended. No follow-up inspection was conducted. The gendarme corporal, Miklos Ferenc, who had helped confiscate the icons in December, and who had returned to Sibiu before the killings, filed a supplementary report noting the unusual religious practices of the village and recommending that the deaths be treated as the consequence of local superstitious panic resulting in self-harm. This explanation was noted in the file. It was not investigated. It was sufficient to close the administrative obligation. Vasile did not contest the classification. He did not write to the bishop. He did not write to the university chemist. He did not write to anyone. On February 1st, 3 days after the killing, 4 days after the creature stood in the square and asked for its houses back, Father Andrei Vasile knelt in his private chamber in front of the blood-painted icon of his own face. He took a sewing needle from his vestment pocket. He pricked the index finger of his left hand. A drop of blood welled on the pad. He pressed it to the icon's mouth. The blood sat on the surface. The paint was crude, dried blood on raw wood, without the centuries of layered absorption that the original icons had carried. There was no reason for the blood to do anything other than sit and dry. It absorbed, slowly, over 20 seconds rather than 15. sinking into the painted mouth, drawn through the surface, leaving no residue. The wood around the mouth did not change color. The paint did not change texture. But the blood was gone. And the room, Vasilei's small, cold, stone-walled room with its writing desk and its stove and its window facing the mountains, settled. The air eased. A tension he had not consciously identified but had been carrying since December 23rd, released by a single increment, as if a weight that had been distributed across 109 points had just found its first new anchor. He withdrew his hand. He bandaged his finger. He stood. Nothing happened that night. No footsteps, no doors opening, no livestock found drained in the morning. Nothing happened the next night either, or the next. On March 1st, he fed the icon again. Same needle, same finger, same drop, same absorption. The livestock attacks did not resume. Mihai Circel, the shepherd, recovered fully by mid-February, though he never returned to the Bâlea road and would not discuss the event for the remainder of his life. The village buried its 11 dead in the churchyard. The graves were marked with standard Orthodox crosses. Parashiva attended every burial but did not enter the church. Vasilei fed the icon on the 1st of every month. Without exception, without discussion, without recording the act in his parish journal or in any official correspondence. He began to notice changes in the icon. The first change was subtle, a matter of line quality. His original painting had been crude. Broad strokes of dried blood on unsanded wood, the proportions approximate, the features recognizable but artistically incompetent. By April 1905, 3 feedings later, the lines were cleaner. Not dramatically, not enough to attribute to anything other than his own perception adjusting to a familiar object. But the jawline was sharper. The brow was more defined. The scar above the left eyebrow, which he had painted as a rough smear, now had the specific curve of the original wound. By September, 6 feedings, the improvement was undeniable. The icon was refining itself. The blood he applied to the mouth was not merely being absorbed. It was being used as material, as pigment. The crude painting was being overwritten from within by something that understood how the original icons had been made and was rebuilding itself toward that standard 1 monthly application at a time. By 1907, the icon was technically accomplished. The green of the eyes, which Vasilei had not painted, having used only blood and ash, had appeared. Faintly at first, then with increasing saturation. The vestments, which he had rendered as a black smear, now showed the fibrous, organic texture of the originals. The fingers had lengthened. The mouth the focal point, the site of absorption, had developed the layered, slightly raised texture that he had observed through his hand lens on Dumitru Luca's icon 3 years earlier. The icon was painting itself, using his blood as medium, building toward a version of itself that matched the originals he had burned. By 1910, it was beautiful. By 1915, it was masterwork, the equal of any icon in any Transylvanian church, with a luminosity and depth that Vasilei, who had studied iconography at seminary, recognized as beyond human technique. By 1920, it was alive in the way the originals had been alive, the eyes tracking, the mouth wet, the surface warm to the touch, in a room where the stove had gone out. Vasilei fed it. Every month. He aged. The icon did not. He lost weight, then hair, then the steadiness of his hands. The icon gained definition, richness, presence. He understood the transaction without needing to name it. The icon was drawing from him, slowly, a fraction of a fraction per month, building itself from his substance the way a tree builds itself from soil. He was the soil. The icon was the root system. And somewhere in the mountains, in the dark, in whatever space the patriarch occupied, when it was not standing in the village road, the network was reestablishing. 1 node instead of 109. 1 priest instead of 83 households. The ratio was unsustainable. He knew this. The amount of blood a single man could provide was nothing against the caloric demand that 109 households had collectively met for 2 centuries. But it was something. It was the single anchor point that kept the network from collapsing entirely. And the patriarch, whatever it was, wherever it was, had accepted the terms. The offspring had not returned. The livestock were not drained. The village was not fed upon. A single, insufficient node was holding a structure that should have required 109, and the creature on the other end of the arrangement was making it work. At what cost to itself, Vasile could not know and did not ask. He did not ask because asking would have required contact, and contact would have required looking at the thing whose face he knew better than his own. And looking at it would have required acknowledging that the grief he had seen in the lamplight on January 27th was not a performance, but a condition. The permanent state of a being that had spent 2 centuries building a system to keep its children from killing, and had watched one man destroy it in an afternoon, and had come to that man and said please, and been answered with an axe. Vasile could not afford to think about that word. Varog, please. If he thought about it, he would have to reconsider everything he knew about what he had burned and why. And that reconsideration would have no end point, because the question at its center was the creature a monster or a parent? And is there a difference, and does it matter if 11 people are dead? Had no answer that left his theology intact. So he fed the icon. He performed his parish duties. He baptized children and married couples and buried the dead and celebrated Easter and Christmas and every saint's day on the canonical calendar. He served Iscovescu for 31 years. He was by all accounts a competent, quiet, unremarkable parish priest who drank moderately, kept accurate records, maintained the church, and never again requested the removal of any devotional object from any household in his parish. He did not replace the icons in the village homes. He did not teach the feeding ritual. He did not tell the village what he was doing in his private chamber on the 1st of every month. The system he maintained was a single node, his own blood, his own icon, his own body serving as the caloric input for a containment network that required a village and was running on one man. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough, but it was what he could do, and the creature accepted it. And the village survived. Father Andrei Vasile died on March 14, 1936. He was 67 years old. The cause of death was recorded by the village's lay medical attendant as general debility consistent with chronic anemia. Vasile had been thin for decades, thinner than his diet and age could explain, though no one in the village commented on it publicly. He had the pallor of a man whose body was producing blood slightly slower than it was losing it, year after year. The deficit too small to kill quickly but too persistent to survive indefinitely. He died in his bed, in his chamber, in the room with the icon. His successor was a young priest named Father Teodor Argesanu, assigned from a parish in Bucharest, who arrived in Iscovescu in April 1936 and found the church in good order, the parish records meticulously maintained, and the private chamber of his predecessor locked. The key was in Vasile's effects. Teodor opened the chamber. He found the writing desk, the stove, the narrow bed, the window facing the mountains, and on the wall, in the position of honor, an icon. It was exquisite, museum quality. 31 years of monthly feeding had produced something that no living painter could have made a portrait of Sfantul Sanghelui, rendered in a medium that was not paint, and on a surface that was not merely wood. With green eyes that held light they could not have generated, and a mouth that was, unmistakably, even in the rational morning light of a priest's chamber in 1936, wet. Beside the icon, on the writing desk, a single folded paper. Vasile's handwriting, the same precise, seminary-trained script that filled 31 years of parish journals. Feed it on the 1st of every month. Do not ask what it is. Do not let it go hungry. The blood is yours to give. What it takes when hungry is not. Teodor read the note. He looked at the icon. He did not understand. He was a seminary-trained rationalist from Bucharest. The same kind of man Vasile had been 32 years earlier, carrying the same theological certainty, the same institutional confidence, the same faith that the world was organized along lines he had been trained to read. But Teodor did something Vasile had not done. He asked Parashiva. She was 93. She had outlived the icon, burning, the feeding, the 11 dead, and the 3 decades of silence that followed. She was blind in one eye, and walked with 2 sticks, and she sat in her doorway in the April sun, and listened to the young priest read Vasile's note aloud. And she said, "He learned. It took him 31 years, but he learned." She told Teodor what the icon was. Not everything, she did not know everything, but enough. The saint, the compact, the feeding, the houses, the burning, the night, the children, the patriarch in the road saying please, and Vasile, on his knees every month for 31 years, pressing a drop of blood to a painted mouth and receiving nothing in return, except the continued absence of the thing that would come if he stopped. Teodor listened. He returned to his chamber. He looked at the icon. On May 1st, 1936, he pricked his finger and fed it. The blood absorbed in 12 seconds, faster than it had absorbed for Vasile in February 1905. The network was hungry. 31 years on a single node had left it starving. Functional, but barely, the way a fire is functional when the last ember is still orange. Vasile's death had interrupted the supply. 6 weeks without feeding. The icon's mouth was not merely wet, it was open. The painted lips parted by a millimeter. A change so slight, Teodor might have dismissed it as perception if he had not just been told what the icon was. He fed it. Every month. He served the parish for 22 years, until 1958, when the communist government's program of rural collectivization and church suppression reassigned him to a factory town in the lowlands. His successor in Iscovescu, if there was one, is not recorded. The village of Iscovescu appears on Austro-Hungarian imperial maps from 1880, 1895, and 1910. It appears on Romanian national maps from 1920, 1932, and 1941. It does not appear on any map printed after 1947. The church still stands. The roof has collapsed over the nave. The walls hold. The graveyard is overgrown. The crosses tilted and cracked, the names eroded by a century of Carpathian winters. The village houses are ruins. Stone walls standing, timbers rotted, roofs fallen in. No one has lived in Iscovescu since the late 1950s, when the last families were relocated during collectivization. In 2019, a Romanian hiking blog called Munții Noștri, Our Mountains, published a post about a day hike through the Făgăraș foothills that included a stop at an unnamed ruined church. The blogger, a university student from Cluj, photographed the exterior, the collapsed nave, the altar screen, and the graveyard. The photographs are competent natural light, good composition, tourist quality. In the 5th photograph, taken from the nave looking toward the side chambers, there is a wall. On the wall, partially obscured by fallen plaster and shadow, there is an object, an icon. The blogger did not mention it in the text. The photograph's caption reads, "Interior detail, altar side." The icon is not the subject. It is in the background, at the edge of the frame, half visible. But it is there. 30 centimeters by 40. Dark wood. A figure in black vestments, green eyes. The paint looks fresh. The post received 14 comments, mostly about trail conditions and wildflower identification. The 15th comment, posted 11 days after publication from an account created that day and never used again, contained no text, only a question in Romanian that the blogger did not reply to and that was deleted within 48 hours, but cached by an automated web archive before removal. Ati hranito? Did you feed it? The blog was last updated in August 2019. The blogger has not posted since. 11 dead in the village of Iscovescu on the night of January 28, 1905. 109 icons burned on December 23, 1904. One icon remains. The paint on the icon was wrong when Father Andrei Vasile first saw it in November 1904. And it is wrong now, in a way that no one has examined closely enough to name. The mouth is wet, the eyes hold light, the wood is warm, and the first of the month is never more than 30 days away.